Hi, everyone. My name is Abha Rajbhandari. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining to you from Lenape Land, colonially known as the Bronx, New York. By profession, I am a neuroscientist, but I consider myself a yoga seeker or a spiritual seeker. There's so much to learn, so much knowledge to gain. And this class is Science and Spirituality of Yoga Satsang, which is unusual in many ways. Where usually science and spirituality are not discussed in one setting, but we've done 2 rounds of this short classes and this satsang, this community gathering. And I think it has been really amazing to bring, these aspects of spirituality and science in one place. Because as human beings, we are curious beings. We have a lot of questions. And so this is kind of what this class is like. So this is a preview class that I'm offering. The actual class will start June 1st. So this will give you a glimpse into what the class is going to look like. And I just wanted to share, so I refer to the Bhagavad Gita, this book by, this version is by the Srila Baladeva Vibhashana, Prabhupada. And so you can, usually I won't recommend getting this particular book or that book. I think the most important thing is to refer to the translation of the shlokas in the Bhagavad Gita. And then during this class now, we're going to go through each shloka from the beginning. And so we'll unpack it, but it's also, I think, important to, rather than looking at the translation, I think it's also good to come up with your own sort of way of looking at it or thinking about it and then reading it, because there may be some doubts and questions, because that has happened to me for sure. So that's what I would recommend. And usually in this class, satsang, we also have a lot of questions. And so I usually start with a check-in question to sort of get the thinking process going. And you can feel free to share regarding that question, your name, pronoun, where you're calling from. But if you don't want to share, that's perfectly fine. Or you can share in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. But all aspects of this satsang is usually recorded, because usually, these discussions and questions that we raise are really valuable and useful for a lot of other people. All right, so in the theme of today's class, so, I'm sure for some of you who are new here, talking about science and spirituality in one place may raise some doubts, right? That was the first thing that came to my mind. And obviously, as a scientist myself, there's a lot of doubts and questions. And so that is exactly the theme or a line of questioning I have for starting off today. So, there are many situations where in our lives, we have doubt about things, doubt ourselves, we doubt others, we doubt the things that we hear and others, right? So my question is, so there's 2 kinds of questions, and you can share a phrase or a word along this question or what comes to your mind. So one is, what does doubt itself mean to you? And then the other aspect of it is having doubt healthy, right? So either of these, if you want to share, and if it's okay, I'm going to call people as I see on my screen. Welcoming Emma here. All right, I have Jill first, if you want to share.
Hey, my name is Jill. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm on Shakori and Okanagan Land in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I don't know, Abba. That's a really hard one. Doubt is healthy. It helps you to rethink things and settle into it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is no right or wrong answer either, right? One of the other things is like we all have our perspectives, our own ways of looking at things, and it's always good to hear everybody's perspective because that's the enriching part of this discussion also. So thank you, Jill. And I'll share my, I forgot to share what I think about it at the end after everyone goes, if that's okay. So welcome, Emma, by the way. So next I have Audrey. But sorry, before I go, Emma, since you just joined us, we just went over the theme of the class, and we are posing a question here about what doubt means, because we're talking about science and spirituality in one setting, and there can be a lot of questions and doubt in mind. And so that's exactly what I wanted to start with is, what does doubt mean to you? And is doubt healthy? You know, is it important? So if you want to share anything along those lines, that would be great. So yes, I had called out Audrey. So if you want to share.
Hi, Abha, everyone. I'm Audrey from Zashi. I live in France, land of the colonizer. Yeah, I think doubt is very healthy. I'm not going to say anything very deep there. And I was just thinking that what is the absence of doubt? And I think it would just be super boring because you would just know it would, or is it, I don't know, maybe I'm just going wrong. It would just, there would be no opportunities to learn something new or to discover something new because you would not be asking any questions. But then, yeah, I don't know, like I guess I need to think about that. That's a really good question. It's, yeah, my mind is just going round now, like, oh yeah, but what about this and that and that and that? But, and I guess that's doubt. I'm doubting your question. Haha, very good.
That's perfectly fine, right? And you bring up a good point there, right? That without doubt, I think life would be pretty boring. And as human beings, I think, you know, in a way, doubt is important. But sometimes having too much doubt can be also not good. So, right. So we'll keep that in our mind. So next I have Diego, if you want to share.
Yeah, what's up, y'all? My name is Diego. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm calling in from New Orleans, actually. Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think for sure it's an evolving answer for me, but I think I think doubt can mean different things. And I think in an unhealthy, closed-minded way, it could mean mistrust or lack of trust. But I think in a healthy way, it could be curiosity and to the points that I think are getting raised, like that, something that's and motivating you to seek answers and ask questions.
Definitely. Right. And I think that is the important thing, right? Like, I think what I always like to say, we don't have to have a degree. We don't have to have education to be scientists. I think we are all born as scientists. If you look at children, they're actually true scientists, right? They have so many questions. And so I think that raises or leads to that aspect of us, right? It doesn't have to, like, having doubt. I think we're leading into, I think, the answer I have later, but yeah, thank you for your share. Next I have Alec.
Hey everyone, my name's Alec. I use he, him pronouns, calling from Choctaw and Chitimacha lands, colonized as New Orleans. And I definitely, upon hearing and like thinking about the word doubt, have a negative connotation, or it was a negative connotation that jumped to mind. But I think letting it sit in and hearing some of the responses, the opportunity or pathway to self-inquiry that I think doubt can offer is certainly beneficial. And so it's just got me thinking about the balance, because I think I spend a lot of time, or I'm very familiar with the slippery slope that can be, you know, self-doubt. And so, yeah, I feel like it's the balance, it's a duality.
Yeah, and I think you also raised 2 points about this doubt towards the outside and then this self-doubt, right? So there's the two kinds of doubt, and we all grapple, I think, with that in this society we live in all the time. And we have to make up our minds. And that's where other aspect of how we get over doubt also comes in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you, Alec. Next, I have Lori.
Hey, good morning. She, her pronouns. Choctaw lands colonized as Baton Rouge. And yeah, I think of doubt as kind of being sort of like skepticism. And yeah, I can see how there's some negative connotation too, but it's also kind of positive because it kind of protects you. If you have no doubt, you just go down to a path of, believing in some kind of really nonsense. So it's kind of protective, I think, in some ways too. But you can be too protective, but I think it can protect you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? And that's a very different perspective than something I hadn't thought about, is that it protects you. And as human beings, I think that's so important because, as evolutionarily, I think doubt was something that helped protect us for sure, in terms of predators that were around us, that, like all the difficulties we had to go through. So I think it's ingrained in us in a way, evolutionarily, to have doubt. But I really like that perspective that it can protect us. Thank you, Lori. Next, I have Vikul. Is that right? Am I saying it right?
Yes, you are. It's Vakul. Hi, everyone. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on Kumeyaay land, colonized as San Diego. No, I believe I'm, here with everyone. I really believe in multiple truths. And I think, initially when I was thinking about doubt, a lot came to mind of, is it coming from a place of judgment or discernment? And the difference between the two leading to action versus inaction. Is there stagnation? Like how am I, how do I move more towards discerning so that I'm acting from a place where I'm not judging, and I'm doing it in a way that, as a scientist, right, like being able to experiment, find more data, and proceed from that point of view. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Wow, you touch upon so many things that we're also going to unpack, as we unpack Bhagavad Gita itself, that aspect of discernment, that aspect of being a scientist in the physical sense of the world, but also scientists in that spiritual dimension where things are not in that physical realm, where we cannot test our hypothesis, right? So you raise that point, and that's so important in the scientific path as well as the spiritual path. I think that questioning and raising question aspect is very, very important. So I think that really brings that other perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Next, I have Harpinder.
Hi, everybody. My name is Harpinder. She, her, hers, and I'm based on Tongva and Chumash land, colonized as Los Angeles. I think it's such a good question. Thank you, Abha, for bringing it to our awareness. I had a similar sort of reaction to Alec in that negative connotations definitely came up first. I think because I first associated it with self-doubt, and I seem to have tons of self-doubt that pops up all the time. So it feels like a negative connotation. I was journaling last week and I was like, what am I calling in? And I wrote down delusional self-belief. And it's like kind of moving from all of that self-doubt to delusional self-belief, which feels healthier in a respect in a certain way. But I think doubt in general is very healthy. I think it's healthy to question things, to want to seek out more answers. But when I also think about my own practice, I know I have to have a lot of faith, a lot of shraddha, something to anchor onto, like I really truly I have trust in this, because sometimes that too much doubt is going to pull me away from continuing to practice, to continuing to believe. So I think there's definitely a balance there.
Yeah, That's a really good point, and we will unpack that. And I have another question later on about how to get over doubt. But you're right? There is a healthy balance because we need doubt to function in the society, because we can't believe and trust or everything. But there is that spiritual dimension where sometimes we do have to put trust to move in a healthy manner as well. And so that's the conundrum of being a human being, and then also a spiritual and a scientific being, right? And this is why, science and spirituality don't always go together, in the truest sense they can, and that's what we'll talk about. But when we bring aspects of organized religion, not the truest sense of spirituality, then there's a lot of butting heads and things not going together, right? So those are really, really important points that you bring up, Harpinder. Thank you. Next, I have Emma.
Hi, my name is Emma. My pronouns are she, her, and I live near Denver, Colorado, on the land of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute tribes. I've really loved hearing everybody share so far. It's given me a lot of ideas, because I think when you posed the question, my first instinct was to go to doubt in myself that I shouldn't be sharing. And so I really went into that kind of self-doubt place, but then loved hearing just kind of this more nuanced, finding a balance between doubt and trust and curiosity and open-mindedness. And I think that's a really beautiful thought and a really lovely way to reframe something that kind of brings up that maybe negative connotation for people, as looking at doubt as being curiosity and open-mindedness and questioning and healthy skepticism with the balance of trust and finding your own way, I guess.
Yeah, and I love you say it's curiosity, but there's also skepticism, right? And actually my share was going to be that it's a curiosity with skepticism, and you, in two aspects, you brought that together, and that's so true, right? I think sometimes we think of doubt as question ourselves, why do I have so much doubt, self-doubt especially, right? Like Harpinder was sharing earlier, and we all have that, and in some levels I think it's also important, but sometimes it can be maladaptive, right? So, all right, we'll unpack all of those aspects more. And Jen shared in the chat, Jen here from Toronto, she, her, lack of faith, spirituality, inner knowing, confidence is doubt for me. Also a lack of feeling connected. Yeah, I think that summarizes a lot of aspect of what doubt is and how we feel it. Yeah, and then from my perspective, I wanted to share, I think, that curiosity with skepticism, it fits really well, because, as a scientist in the scientific world, I am, used to only having things look at things in that evidence manner, hypothesis driven manner, results, all in that physical realm. But there are a lot of times where even in science, there's a lot of doubt, right? And sometimes science also doesn't answer all the questions that I myself have. And so, and it's important for me because I consider myself a scientist and a spiritual person. And so these two things have to come together in my mind. And so that's, I think, goes along with many of your shares, right? Just anything else. So thank you all for sharing and really enlightening with your thoughts and perspectives. I think that's so important. I learned so much every time we have this satsang. All right, so what I'm going to do now is share some slides, because I've prepared some slides to go over just to help you also kind of always a little tricky. Oops. Okay, here we go. All right. So I just wanted to go over a little outline of what we are gonna go through in our satsang today. So first, we're gonna talk about or unpack doubt in many different ways. And then I want to bring up, since this is the first satsang and a preview satsang, in terms of doubt about science and or spirituality in one place. And for that, then we will start looking at Bhagavad Gita from the very first shloka. Usually in the past, I just pick out shlokas and unpack different themes, but now we'll go through it in a sequential manner and flow with it and see what are doubts, what are questions, and all of these things that come to our mind and go through it together. So that's why satsang is so important, right? That's exactly what it means, is coming together to answer or find answers to some questions. Yeah, so many of you shared what doubt is for you, or how you look at doubt, right? So obviously doubt is important for raising questions. And I was alluding to in the earlier part that as human beings, evolutionarily, doubt I think made us evolve, right? In so many ways, if we look at it, our ways of perceiving things, our way of sensing things, our sensory aspect, how, our brain, the major part of us being humans is our brain in that physical sense, because it allows us to perceive the world, to think about the world, to cognize the world, and all of that. And so, if we look at, this is an image of cross-section of the brain in the center, and the brain has many different parts, right? So a brain doesn't work with one single area or region. All of these regions, like the frontal cortex, which is this front part of the brain, which actually differentiates us from many other animals in so many ways, like our critical thinking ability, this doubting ability, right? Like this ability to see things from this questioning, like our sense of ourselves in this vast cosmic perspective, like all of those are known, and with many experiments have been shown is modulated by this part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front, right? Whereas the other parts of our brain, like the other hemispheres, like hypothalamus, which is in this limbic structure, and others, they have been conserved across many different species. So if you look from other vertebrate species, including rats and mice, all the way to humans, these other parts of the brain are very well conserved, and evolutionarily, they are the ones that allowed us to have these like fight or flight or freeze reactions in front of predators and all that. But what developed a lot more, and one of the reasons in human beings, is this ability to cook food, right? So when we found fire, our frontal cortex didn't require a lot of energy to find food, and so we were able to conserve energy, and our cortex developed a lot more. And so this is what differentiates us, right, from that objective sense of way, from a scientific. And I always, like in science and spirituality, it's so important to look at things from objective and subjective, right? Because most of things that we look at in science is objective reality, right? Like how we can unpack what's around us, what's in us at that physical level. And so science undoubtedly has the power to raise questions. But like I was also alluding, sometimes though, it can lead to conspiracies and misinformation also, right? So that's something we have to grapple with, even though sometimes science also may not answer every aspect of the question. It gives like a perspective of the reality in some tangible way, but it still doesn't answer all of the questions, right? And so And there are many kinds of doubts, right? So for example, like social dilemma is kind of a doubt where, sometimes we have to grapple with things like truth versus loyalty to someone. And that's where, aspects of doubt come in. As I was just mentioning, the scientific dilemma of sometimes grappling with, what's out there, what's presented in science, if that's real information versus misinformation, and how people use that information, right? Sometimes even scientific information is like kind of taken in a wrong way and spread in a wrong manner. And then there are ethical and moral dilemmas that also have aspects of those doubts. But if we really step back, right? So these are all, I guess, important, but also they can raise some issues. Well, it comes with both of those, right? So these are important things to have doubt, but then there are aspects, the doubt can be unhealthy. But if we even step further back and look at ourselves and question some of the things, right? So this is something I always like to start with when we start this satsang, is this view of, so this is recently from the James Webb Telescope image of the cosmos. And so if we look at from that cosmic perspective of things, not this like daily, day-to-day like life, from that very big perspective, I'm sure, I can probably say with confidence that we have had questions like, what is the purpose of my existence in this vast cosmos, right? Or in other words, who am I, or who are we, and why do I exist? Like, what is the purpose of my existence? And so in a way, when we think of things from that cosmic, this big perspective, it brings us, I think, the sense of awe, a sense of connection that we all sort of have this kind of question. Also the sense of, from a scientific perspective, that we are all made up of the same stuff, that stars, which has been shown, right? Like all the aspects, molecular aspects of our being, like carbon, oxygen. These are also things that, the galaxies are made of, stars are made of. So we also have those aspects, but then we have these fundamental human questions like, who, in a spiritual sense, who am I, right? Like, what is my truest purpose? And this is where this aspect of science and spirituality, I think, really merge, because in a way, these questions are both scientific questions as well as spiritual questions, right? Like to ask in a scientific manner, when we ask, what is the purpose of this brain region in my brain, or what is the purpose of this valve in my heart, or this part of my stomach, we are in a big way trying to fit together a puzzle of trying to understand what are we as a biological being, right? And in a same manner, in a spiritual sense, when we say, who am I? Like if we look at the trees, like compared to the trees, what am I, right? Like, do I have the same consciousness as a tree, or is it different? So these are the spiritual questions also, and scientific questions. Let's look at this furthermore now. So this, I've shared this also in the past in our satsang, but bringing it back to kind of connect this scientific aspect and spiritual aspect in a way. So these two side-by-side images are of a brain neuron. On the left-hand side, it's a hippocampal neuron in the part of the brain called the hippocampus, showing that there's one neuron has all of these connections to other neurons in that part. So neurons are these cells that make up brain regions, right? So that's how the brain functions, is through these cellular structures. And then this right-hand side image is of the cosmic web, which is also very similar, which shows this web of how stars are aligned with each other, or galaxies. And so you can see this, there is this web-like structure in both our brain as well as this cosmic level. And I want to bring up this quote from Carl Sagan, a famous astrophysicist, who I think was also very spiritual in many ways, because the questions he raised or aspects he brought up were very scientific, but also it raised a lot of like spiritual aspects in many people, including me, I would say, and I think few others who've shared this in the past, like Lori. So science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual. Right? Let me read that one more time. Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual. Carl Sagan, The Demon-Haunted World. And so now here, I'm going to take a little pause and pose a question before we now. So this is now looking at things from that scientific end, right? So usually I like to bring up scientific aspects and then turn to spirituality and then merge them together. And so now here I want to take a pause and pose question as to, okay, so we have a lot of doubt. Undoubtedly, we have doubts, right? But what are things that cause you to get over doubt at this point? So if anybody wants to share by unmuting or on the chat, please feel free to do so. Oh, Alec has to hop off early, but looking forward to our satsang. Thank you, Alec. Yeah, anybody want to share any thoughts that come to your mind?
I guess I could hop in. I think I think again, this like idea of inquiry, I think it's interesting how I think it came up about like self-doubt versus external doubt, because I think in a lot of ways, regardless of whether it's external doubt or self-doubt, both self-inquiry and external inquiry like help, right? So like taking the time to sit with it and ask yourself questions and really get to the root of, okay, what is it that's causing me this doubt? What is, what hesitations is it that I have around this? But also sitting in spaces like this and asking each other, hearing off of each other, feeding off of each other. And I think just kind of repeating that process like gets to a clear answer or more, or just builds more clarity around it.
Or raises more questions, right? And
right. Yeah. Often,
yeah. But so what I'm hearing is that inquiry, like within the self, but also maybe trying to find answers in some kind of knowledge-based way, right? May help you get over doubt. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts or more questions? Emma shares, I think I start to get over doubt when I approach new things with curiosity and let myself be my own science experiment. Oh, I love that. Yeah, exactly, right? Like small things, right? Like, why is the grass green? Why is this flower in this particular shape? Why does it have like 4 petals, whereas this flower has, those are kind of the questions that can come to our mind, like that childlike curiosity, right? And so I love that when you approach things in that curious way and look at things as a science experiment, it may help you find answers, because sometimes we can find answers or we make peace with it, right? Like it is the way it is. And that's fine, right? Or you can be like, let me find out why is this flower like this, and go through that knowledge-based way. Or in a spiritual way, you can be like, yeah, this is the way things are, and it's just part of nature, really nice. Audrey, yes, I was about to say something similar, being open to being wrong. Oh yeah, that's a really good point. And that's what doubt, the reason we have doubt, I think that raises an important point, is because we are afraid to be wrong, right? We may have some preconceived notions about certain things, about how things function, either from our knowledge or what's been passed down to us, through generations, or through our own sort of self-inquiry. But the reason we doubt is that we have that thing, am I wrong, the way I'm looking at things, right? So that's a really good point, right? That's another reason why I think being a scientist of the self is important, because then we can find answers. And in fact, the path of yoga or spirituality is not that one-dimensional path of just following what was taught or passed down. It actually was a process of inquiry, right? Always, like the rishis, the yogis, when they went to the mountains, in many ways, they were seeking answers to some of their questions, right? And so I think it brings up those aspects. Thank you, Audrey. Any other thoughts or shares?
I do. I have been talking about this in classes this week, about the shift in perspective over time. And it goes right along with this, as that if and Audrey's about, and Emma's about being wrong, because one thing that's true at one point in time might become not true at some other point in time. And so and science tells us that, right? Like we thought this was the answer, but then we did more research and we know this was the answer. But people don't really like that, right? That shift, like you learn a thing and then you're like, but that's the thing. And it happens it is the intersection too of science and spirituality, because in your life, you like it. You're like, this is the thing I'm doing, but that doesn't stay the thing forever. You have to be able to be open. And if without doubt, you wouldn't be able to be open to making those shifts. So it feels all interconnected to me.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Because even in science, a lot of times certain theories are proven wrong after more experimentation or some other findings. And that's so true, right? Sometimes, and many scientists have also this inability to leave their hypothesis or kind of change their mind, even if new findings are found, because, it's something, that has been worked out and it's like ingrained in our mind. So that's an important point. And what I want to raise, with this is that I think, a healthy level of doubt with anything is a good thing, right? Because it makes us question. We're not just taking everything at a face value, what was given to us, but we are questioning. And, I will share what questions have been coming to my mind lately with more knowledge, even about the Bhagavad Gita. So we'll get into that. So let me move on since it's 11:39. All right, so I'll share. So what are some aspects that can help us get over doubt, right? So obviously knowledge, and many of you shared that. There is aspect of conscience, which is, that I guess part of that self-inquiry, understanding the self, part of way of looking at things, which also goes with self-knowledge, right? So path of yoga is path of self-knowledge, understanding, the truth or reality in that spiritual sense. But also, I think that's also important, as if we consider ourselves as a scientific being, we are that way, right? Like we need to understand that, have that self-knowledge. And I think Harpinder had brought up this earlier, but sometimes we also have to trust in the process, trust the way things are. And so, that is where, that balance of doubt, in that healthy, but not over sort of consuming way comes into play. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears and get into the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so before I get into, because this is the preview and first class, so if some of you are not familiar, so Bhagavad Gita is actually a text that's part of a bigger story or text called the Mahabharata. So Bhagavad Gita is a spiritual text, but the entire aspect of Mahabharata, which involves this sort of war between two groups, two cousin groups, and so even though the story, the whole Mahabharata, which is a war that takes place between these two cousin groups, it takes over the 18-day time period. And Bhagavad Gita is this conversation between Sri Krishna, who is the charioteer of one of the, I guess, warriors named Arjuna. And it's a conversation that happens between them two. And so it's a very short, it's considered to be just like a 45-minute kind of conversation. But in that 45-minute time duration, there is a lot of things that come into mind in Arjuna's mind, right? A lot of doubts about even why he's at this war and why he needs to do this. And in many ways, it relates to, I think, questions and doubts we all have in our mind about, what is the right thing to do? What is the wrong thing to do? Like, all of these. So that's what it like captures. And so in that way, the message in Bhagavad Gita, if we look at it, even though, some may consider it a religious text, I think it's a spiritual text in that way, because it's psychological, it's spiritual, and it has life lessons that's applicable. Even if it's, if it's considered like 5,000-year-old knowledge, it still has applicability, I think, in many ways to the modern world, right? So that's what I wanted to share. And so here, like one of the main aspects of Bhagavad Gita also may bring up, because we're in this class, is, the doubt about, can we take everything in Bhagavad Gita at its face value, or take it as, some may consider it a mythology, some consider it history, some consider it symbolism, right? And then, the questions may come up, and I want to raise this before we go further, is like, questions like, did Mahabharata even exist? Is this just a myth? Is it a symbolism? And does it even matter, right? Like when we're trying to bring this knowledge or aspect or questions about science and spirituality, do any of these matter? And these may be questions in your mind also. But what I want to bring up is that, a book like Bhagavad Gita, even if you have these doubts or questions of if it was real or not, or all of that, I think book like Bhagavad Gita can be a huge source of empowerment, of symbolism, or important in our journey, right? In our path of being a scientific being and a spiritual being. And so, yes, scientific and spiritual knowledge, as we talked about earlier, requires logic and reasoning, but can we actually apply the knowledge we gain from this text into understanding the gross versus the subtle? There's a lot of aspects of our being that's at that physical dimension where we can, experimentally, we can look at things and test and read papers, but there are really, really subtle aspects of our being. Sometimes it's even hard to describe in words, right? Like the feelings, the emotions, the senses that we have. And so these are those nuanced aspects that I encourage as we move on to look at, is the applicability of it in our life, right? Rather than the doubt. And so I just want to share this really quickly, is that, if we look at symbolism of the Bhagavad Gita, and Yogananda was one of the spiritual sort of yogis who brought yoga, aspects of yoga into the West. And he has described the symbolism of symbolism in Gita as this conflict between, a cosmic conflict between the good and the evil, right? And so in that way, there are all these characters in this book, and we will unpack those slowly as we go through it. But for example, Dhritarashtra, who's the first shloka I'm going to share is from him, who's this king, blind king, who is the son of one of the cousins who's who instigated this war that's about to take place, right? And so Dhritarashtra, in a way, from a Yogananda's perspective, is the mind that's controlled by the senses. There are the 5 horses in the chariot in which Arjun and Shri Krishna were sitting in, and that signifies the 5 senses. Kauravas signify, which is one of the cousin groups that instigated this war, are the 100 Indriyas, and so on and so forth, right? I won't go through all of it, but this is where aspects of symbolism can also come into play. So we can, even though we have doubt, we can look at these things as symbolic, in a way applicable to our life, right? So, and so then, what is Bhagavad Gita? I just want to share this little bit. So the Hindu scriptures, there are many different kinds of scriptures, and this is a summary of that. And so, I won't go into all of this, but what itihasa, which is in this red blocks, means is history, right? So Mahabharata and Ramayana are 2 sort of epic texts that fall into history, actually, and Bhagavad Gita is that part of the Mahabharata, this war. So it's considered history, right, in many ways, because I won't go into it, but there are things that tell us that it was actually historical. And then yoga, the path of yoga, is actually one of the philosophical systems. There are many philosophical systems, but yoga is a path of self-realization, and it falls into this darshana category, which means a philosophical system about understanding logic, physical reality, but yoga is about our self-realization. All right. Okay, little pause here before I go into the first shloka. All right, taking a deep breath here. And okay, so the first shloka in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verse 1 says, I'll read in Sanskrit first and then in English. Dhritarashtra uvacha dharmashetra kurushetra samaveta yuyuttaswam mamakam pandara vaschaya kimakurvarta sanjaya. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjay, after gathering on the holy field of Kurukshetra and desiring to fight, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do? One more time. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjay, after gathering on the holy field of Kurukshetra and desiring to fight, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do? So this first verse or shloka in Bhagavad Gita is a question itself, right? So here, Dhritarashtra is the blind king who is sitting, and Sanjay has been given this, he has this vision, he has a vision that he can actually, even if he's in the king's room, he can see what's happening in the battlefield. So he's been given this sort of vision, right? Which we can consider a myth, reality, or symbolism. We can look at it that way. But what is coming to Dhritarashtra's mind is because this war that's about to take place is between his sons, the Kauravas, and Pandavas, who are his brother's sons, right? So it's the war between the 2 cousins that's about to take place. And Dhritarashtra here, the important thing he says is that after gathering on the holy field of Kurukshetra, Dharmashetra Kurukshetra means it's a holy land, and that may affect the mind of his son. So here, when he's raising this question, he has a doubt, and he doesn't want this doubt to be a reality. He does want this war to go on, because if the war doesn't go on, if there is peace, that means his sons have to come to a compromise, and he doesn't want that, right? So in a way, if you really look at it, it's like a battle of his conscience, because his conscience knows that this is a holy land. There shouldn't be a war taking place here. That's why he calls it Dharma, like the very first line in Bhagavad Gita is Dharmashetra Kurukshetra. This holy land is about to turn into a land of war. And is it going to take place? Is this going to happen? And he knows it's not right, but he wants, in a way, this battle to take place, right? And so now here, let me, what is the time? Okay, let me just skip this right now and pose the question here before we unpack that. So what are your doubts about a text like Bhagavad Gita, right? Like we're beginning to unpack, aspects of this. And so I have certain doubts and I'll share that, but what are some things that come to your mind, as we are delving into this, if you want to share? And maybe we can come, to some kind of, not solution, but some kind of way of a perspective of looking at things. But yeah, if anybody wants to share.
Yeah, I'll share. Maybe like, and I'm somewhat familiar with it, and maybe like really like Krishna, he's sort of, and I don't know if it's like to say he's all powerful, but yeah, like, yeah, I don't know. That's all.
So wait, so the doubt about Krishna
It's
being
Krishna, yeah, like Lord Krishna. I guess like that he's kind of sort of everywhere, and sort of he has a lot of power. Not, I don't know if power is the word, but yeah, that he has a lot of powers, I guess. Or
why is, so you're thinking like why he has the power, or like
yeah, like and does he really have this power, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, obviously I may not have all the answers, right? Like, so that's something where our scientific sort of questioning can come into play, because we can look at Krishna as a symbol of that, something that brings together this, our own battles in our mind and kind of has solution to that. Because in a lot of ways, the texts, even though, there are many gods and goddesses in Hindu scriptures, sometimes they're just symbolic of certain things, right? That, in reality, truth is only one. We know that, like Tasvam Asi, right? Like truth is one, but there are many forms. So yeah, so that's where, I cannot say what is the right answer for this, right? Like I cannot say, yes, Krishna is all powerful, because that's in a way religious, right? Saying like, yes, you have to believe in Krishna because, and I don't think I have, that authority to say, because, I think that comes from our own mind. But that's a really good point you raise, right? Okay, any other Audrey shares? We raised this already in previous satsang, but kind of like the objectives of who wrote it, as there's some issue around caste, for example, but ultimately, as you said, Abha, it is also up to us to analyze and take what rings true to us. Oh my gosh, such an important point you raise, Audrey. And actually you'll see in my like my shares here, that's exactly the sort of doubts lately I have about reading Bhagavad Gita, right? Like there has been a shift, because before I wanted, as a scientific person, I wanted to understand spirituality. And this was the first text like I sort of dug in to, and I was looking at things from that face value. And I'm like, yes, there are many things here applicable to daily life, right? But exactly, I think that's an important point. Any other thoughts or shares?
Yeah, for me, I would say having Indian background and growing up in the Midwest, I feel like my doubts really ring about the discrimination in the society and the community that I grew up in. Like I went to a school called Svadhyaya, and it just felt like as we move forward in like the society and the culture that we have today, the caste system, the discrimination is here. And for me, at least in my experiences. And so I just have doubts of even delving deeper into these texts because of the triggers within me.
Absolutely. And we just with Tejal Yoga finished or did a book discussion of Tenmori's book, right, about the trauma of caste. And there were so many things that were raised there about, that I hadn't known, right? Like all the aspects of, even though I grew up in Nepal and I knew like caste was very prevalent and aspects, but there were so many things about this perspective change, right? Like how we look at even these texts, because a lot of time these texts are written by men of higher caste, And it has been passed down, and they have caused many ways harm by excluding people from certain caste, or even women, right, who were not included in many rituals, or if they were going through menstruation, they couldn't be part of so many aspects. And so there is definitely that, right? And for me also, I think, that's the part I cannot grasp wrap my head around, is like, yes, these knowledge, these aspects are applicable, but there are, the way it has been passed down, I think in that, the religious way, or even Hinduism in reality, how it has been passed down is in a way that organized religion sort of way, right? Even though Sanatan Dharma, from the knowledge from which it comes from, before even caste, 2000 years ago, when caste wasn't part of the society, the knowledge was applicable to many, and in many ways, the society was matriarchal, and there were, people were involved. But once this aspect of caste became prevalent, if we'll have to dig into the history of that, then things, I think we can say like Hinduism is just like other organized religion, right, in terms of these things. So those are really, really important points as we move forward, right? Like what we want to take from this, how we can apply to this, but how we can also use this understanding and knowledge to be aware and do something about, the thing that's happening, right, with casteism and all that. So let me see. Okay, so it's 11:57, so I'm gonna move forward with this, and we'll continue. If you plan to join the satsang, there will be many other, discussions like this that we will have. But for now, I will share. So these are my doubts, as Audrey was raising, right? And Vikul, you raised, and many others probably resonate with some of these, the racism aspects of, other parts of our society that are excluded from certain things, casteism, patriarchy. And so here, I think this is where that self-discernment can come into play, right? Like, what are the things that we can actually apply, but also actually do something about changing the world? And so again, I'm not asking you to believe in anything. I want to make that clear, right? Like, I don't want, the point of this science and spirituality is to not to believe anything at just, how it is presented, but to have questions. And I think all of us having questions and raising these questions is the most important point about being in this satsang, right? Like, I'm not telling you like, okay, whatever this book is telling you is the right thing. So just want to share that before we close it off for today. So I just want to conclude what we have for today in some sort of way, tangible way, is that to summarize, we can say that wisdom and knowledge from books can only be useful, or they can make one content if we apply them to our lives, right? And so that's something I want to re-emphasize. And then, in fact, what we learn from books is not just for absorbing and keeping it in our mind, right? Not saying like, okay, I learned this and this is, but rather being a scientist, experimenting with it, reflecting on it, right? So that's the most important thing. And so then that's what this path of spirituality or yoga is. It's not a mindless path, it's not about shutting your mind off and being in that meditation all the time. Yes, that is part of it, but one of the most important path of being in the spiritual journey is inquiry, is contemplation, is doubt, right? At every step of the way. And I think that's what can help us seek answers or find answers. So that's what I want to end with on this portion, and we'll just close with a really short close with a little practice. I didn't have time to do a longer one, so let's just find a comfortable seat here, trying to just tune in to your own natural rhythm of breathing. Taking a deep inhale through the nose. And open mouth, exhale, let it go. Inhaling through the nose. And exhaling through the mouth. Inhaling this time through the nose. And exhaling through the nose. Bringing your hands to heart center if you want in Anjali Mudra. Taking a deep inhale here. I'm going to chant the sound of Om. You can listen or join in. Ah. May I be peaceful, safe, happy. May you be peaceful, safe, happy. May everyone be peaceful, safe, and happy. May everyone find ways in this doubtful, in this difficult world, through our own conscious, in this ever-changing world, through our own graciousness, joyousness. Thank you to everyone for being here. I'm acknowledging all the teachers that have come before me, who have laid this path for us to question, to doubt, and to seek answers. Thank you so much. Letting the light in through the eyes. Thank you everyone for being here in this satsang. I hope to see you all for more enriching conversations, discussions, opening our minds in future satsang that starts on June 1st.